The late-night studio in Los Angeles was buzzing the way it always buzzes on a Tuesday night. Cameras warming up, band tuning behind the curtain, studio audience laughing at the floor manager's warm-up jokes. But outside that warm little bubble, something very different was happening across the country. A president had spent the morning threatening to exterminate an entire civilization on social media. A press secretary was manufacturing a fake DoorDash photo op at the White House. A first lady was preparing to blindside her own husband on live television over the name Jeffrey Epstein. And somewhere in his office, a 40-year-old former civil rights lawyer turned YouTube host was stacking receipts for the biggest story no cable network in America had the courage to tell. What you are about to read is the night two of the most watched voices in the country. One comedian behind a late-night desk, one lawyer behind a home office camera, quietly picked apart the single biggest propaganda stunt of the year while the White House was still bragging about pulling it off. The date was April 8, 2026. Trump's self-imposed deadline for Iran had just passed. He had spent the morning threatening to wipe out an entire civilization. He had posted on Truth Social that a whole civilization would die that night, never to be brought back again. He had set an 8 p.m. Eastern deadline. He had threatened to blow up Iran's power plants, its bridges, its oil infrastructure, unless the Strait of Hormuz was reopened. And then, less than 90 minutes before that same deadline, he announced a ceasefire. 2 more weeks. He gave Iran 2 more weeks. Jimmy Kimmel walked out onto his stage that night and said with a small shake of his head that it was D-Day. In this case, he said, the D stood for dementia. He said Trump had gone from whining about losing the Nobel Peace Prize to threatening a civilization with total annihilation. He had, as Kimmel put it, gone from Mahatma Gandhi to General Zod like that. The audience laughed the way audiences always laugh when they are half amused and half horrified at the same time. Then Kimmel played a montage, a compilation of every single time Trump had said the same 2 words about Iran, about deals, about threats, about deadlines, about ceasefires. Every clip had the same man, the same suit, the same 2 words. 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. Kimmel waited for the laughter to roll. Then he delivered the line. Trump, he said, was like a conscientious employee. He always gives 2 weeks' notice. That is what Kimmel does. He watches what Trump does. He waits for the pattern to reveal itself. And then he puts it on television, so 6 million people a night can see it clearly. And in April 2026, the pattern had never been more visible. But before we get to every single thing Kimmel unpacked that week, we have to talk about Ben Meiselas, because Kimmel and Ben were not telling the same story in the same way. They were telling it from opposite ends. And when you put them side by side, the full picture that emerged was bigger than either one of them alone. Ben Meiselas is 40 years old. He is a former civil rights attorney who represented Colin Kaepernick and the victims of the Fire Festival. He walked away from legal practice in 2023 to run Meiselas Touch full-time. He and his brothers Brett and Jordan had built the network from their parents' house in quarantine back in 2020. What started as a political action committee making viral video ads had somehow become the #1 YouTube channel in the United States across all categories. Not just political channels, all channels. For 5 straight weeks in a row, Meiselas Touch had generated more views than any other channel on the entire platform. Ben had been named host of the Best News Podcast at the 2026 iHeartRadio Awards, beating out The Daily, NPR's Up First, and The Megyn Kelly Show. And on March 1st, 2026, the day after the United States and Israel launched what the administration called Operation Epic Fury against Iran, Ben sat down at his camera and posted what he labeled an important Sunday message. He wrote that what the Trump administration was calling Operation Epic Fury, he was going to call something else. He said he was going to call it Operation Epstein Fury. He said he was going to call it the Jeffrey Epstein War. He said it because Trump had still not explained to the American people why the war was happening. He had not explained the objective. He had not explained the endgame. He had not explained why American service members were being put at risk. Meanwhile, the Epstein files, which had begun dropping in late 2025 and had contained explosive material linking Trump and his inner circle to Jeffrey Epstein, were still not fully public. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General who was overseeing the Epstein file releases, was still in her job. The April 14th deposition of Ghislaine Maxwell was still scheduled on the calendar, and the bombs had started falling on February 28th. Ben saw the sequence. He named it on day 1. That was 6 weeks before the ceasefire. In the 6 weeks since, almost everything Ben said had been confirmed. The ceasefire that Trump announced on April 8th, the one Kimmel had immediately labeled another 2 weeks delay, was the same ceasefire Ben had predicted would be a deal in which which Iran walked away with everything it wanted. Iran kept enriching uranium. Iran got sanctions relief. Iran kept its leverage over the Strait of Hormuz. Ben had called it, on camera, not a victory, but a surrender document dressed up as a deal. And within 48 hours of the ceasefire announcement, Iranian negotiators had refused to even show up for the follow-up talks in Islamabad. The deal was collapsing before the ink was even dry. Kimmel covered the collapse in his own way. He noted that Trump had declared total victory on April 8th, bragging on air that all military objectives had been met and exceeded. And then Kimmel played the clip, Trump, in his own voice, telling a reporter that he had considered letting Iran charge a $2 million toll on ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Maybe it would be a joint venture, Trump had said, a U.S.-Iranian joint venture. Kimmel shook his head. That, he said, is our mafia don, always in for a taste. You have to pay the toll if you want to get through. This is how he thinks. Just go into business together. No hard feelings about killing your whole family. What do you say we start over and partner up? That is my little mullah. Even Trump's own Vice President J.D. Vance had admitted on camera that the ceasefire was fragile. Vance had compared it, inexplicably, to an antique Chesterfield sofa, warning that you had to make love to it softly. Kimmel played that clip too. He noted that Vance was now in charge of the ceasefire negotiations, along with Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Special Son-in-Law Jared Kushner. What a trio, he said. We would be better off with Alvin, Simon, and Theodore. And then Kimmel played both clips back to back. Trump declaring total victory. Vance warning the whole thing could fall apart. The same administration, the same day, on camera. Two different realities, broadcast at the same time. But this was only the warm-up, because the bigger story, the story nobody in corporate media wanted to touch, was what happened next. On April 9th, Melania Trump walked to a podium in the grand foyer of the White House and delivered a prepared statement that nobody in Trump's inner circle had been told was coming. Trump himself, according to a reporter who called him directly, said he had no idea his wife was holding a press conference until it was already happening. He had been in a meeting about the war. She had simply walked out in front of the cameras without giving him a heads up, without telling him the subject. And the subject was Jeffrey Epstein. She said the lies linking her to Jeffrey Epstein needed to end. She said she had never been friends with Epstein. She said she had never had any relationship with Epstein or with his accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell. She described the 2002 email she had once sent to Maxwell as nothing more than casual correspondence. That 2002 email is already in the public Epstein files, and Ghislaine Maxwell had responded to Melania by calling her, in writing, Sweet Pea. Hey, Sweet Pea, Maxwell had written. Melania's email to Maxwell had referenced an article in New York Magazine about Epstein. The same article, as Ben Meiselas pointed out on his own show the next morning, in which Trump himself had told the interviewer that Epstein was a terrific guy who liked beautiful women on the younger side. Ben went through the emails on his April 9th broadcast, line by line. He said, just show the photos of Melania with Epstein. Just go through them one by one. He noted that the New York Magazine piece Melania had emailed Maxwell about was the exact same piece where Trump had praised Epstein directly, in his own words. Kimmel's take on the timing was immediate and devastating. He said Trump had spent the past 6 weeks trying to bomb the Epstein story out of the headlines, and 2 days after the ceasefire, his own wife put it right back on top. She must really hate him, Kimmel said. I do not know how else to explain it. She must really hate him. On live television, in front of millions of people. And then Kimmel went further. He said that Trump's approval rating after 6 weeks of the Iran war was now, according to The Economist, somewhere between Bill Cosby and strangers clipping their toenails in public. Not as a metaphor, as an actual comparison to polling data. The man who had launched the war to distract from Epstein now had an approval rating between a convicted sex offender and something nobody wanted to be trapped on an airplane next to. Kimmel let the audience breathe. Then he delivered the next line. The only way this conflict ends, he said, is if Iran gives Trump some kind of award, like the Hormuz Peace Prize. You can put it next to the one he got from Hormel, Chile. And then Kimmel, to his own credit, admitted on air that even Fox News was struggling to sell the administration's victory narrative. He played a clip of Lawrence Jones from Fox and Friends, calmly walking through the objectives Trump had originally set for the war. The dismantling of all major nuclear facilities, not achieved. The end of uranium enrichment, not achieved. The transfer of enriched Iranian stockpiles out of the country, not achieved. The acceptance of intrusive international inspections, not achieved. The suspension of Iran's ballistic missile program, not achieved. Kimmel blinked at the camera. "I think this is good news," he said, "but only because I have had a serious head injury." Fox News, he pointed out, was openly admitting that the United States had gotten nothing out of the war. They were bouncing back and forth between admitting the truth and trying to ignore the Taco Belephant in the room, because the nickname had already spread. Taco. Trump always chickens out. The acronym had originated in a Financial Times story after one of the many times Trump had backed down on tariffs, and it had taken on a life of its own, not just in America, all over the world. Kimmel said he was not entirely comfortable with the label, only because it pushed Trump into a corner, and the last thing Trump needed, Kimmel said, was to feel cornered while holding the nuclear codes. But while Kimmel was pulling laughs out of the war itself, Ben Meiselas was dismantling a different part of the same show. Because while the country was trying to process the collapse of the ceasefire, the Trump White House had rolled out what might have been the single most clumsy propaganda stunt of the entire administration. The DoorDash grandma, a woman named Sharon Simmons, had been delivered to the White House, supposedly as a random DoorDash driver bringing McDonald's to the Oval Office. The story being pushed was that she had personally saved enough money under Trump's no tax on tips policy to help fund her husband's stage 3 cancer treatment. The video was posted. The press secretary wrote glowing captions. The hashtags exploded. And within minutes, DoorDash stock jumped 4.61%, increasing the company's market cap by roughly $2 billion in a single day. Ben Meiselas took the whole thing apart on camera, piece by piece. Sharon Simmons, he explained, was not some random DoorDash driver from a D.C. neighborhood. She was from Arkansas. She had already testified months earlier, in July of 2025, at a MAGA Republican House Ways and Means field hearing in Nevada. Her husband, Ben noted, often wore a MAGA hat in public photographs. She had appeared at Republican event after Republican event. She was, in other words, a touring prop. Then Ben went after the actual math. Simmons had told multiple interviewers that her total annual income was about $22,000, with more than half of that coming from tips. That income level would put her in one of the lowest federal tax brackets in the country. The total federal tax she would have owed before the no tax on tips policy was, Ben calculated, at most around $1,000, maybe a few thousand if you push the numbers generously. That is not a life-changing amount for a family paying for stage 3 cancer treatment in the United States. Cancer treatment routinely runs into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Ben said it plainly. A couple thousand in savings will pay for maybe one oncology appointment, maybe one dosage of medication. It is not saving anybody's life. And that, Ben said, was exactly the point. The stunt was not actually about helping Sharon Simmons. The stunt was about manufacturing an image. An image of a kind old grandmother, personally delivering food to the president, personally praising the president's tax policy, personally crying on camera about her sick husband. All of it designed to do exactly two things: distract from the war and pump the DoorDash stock price. Ben walked through the entire playbook. He reminded viewers that Trump had pulled this kind of stunt throughout the 2024 campaign. The black church stunt, where Trump had walked into a supposedly black church that had been filled with white MAGA supporters, because the building was in the middle of a property dispute between factions, and the faction that was with him simply filled the pews with friendly faces. The bodega stunt, where Trump had walked into bodegas in the Bronx and Harlem, and the cameras had caught the same young Republican volunteers appearing in shot after shot, cycling from location to location. The Chick-fil-A stunt, where an Atlanta-based MAGA operative named Michaela Montgomery had appeared at a Chick-fil-A in Atlanta, hugged Trump on camera, and been marketed as just a spontaneous young black woman excited to see the former president. Except she was not spontaneous. She was, Ben showed, a paid Republican activist who had turned up at event after event, in location after location, doing the exact same thing every single time. Even Lara Trump, Ben noted, had basically admitted the whole system on state-friendly television. During an interview, she had looked straight into the camera and insisted, almost proudly, that when Trump visited a bodega in Harlem, that was not manufactured. When he visited a Chick-fil-A in Atlanta, that was not manufactured. She had listed the very stunts everyone already knew were staged and insisted, on camera, that none of them were staged. And now here was the latest chapter. The DoorDash grandma rolled into the Oval Office. handed a $100 tip on camera, told to smile for the video, pumped across every Trump-aligned social channel simultaneously. And within minutes, as Ben showed, the DoorDash stock had jumped 4.5%, and the market cap had added $2 billion in value. Somebody, somewhere had known that stunt was coming, and somebody, somewhere had made real money off of it. Ben was not laughing. He was clinical. He built the case the way a lawyer builds a case, because that is what he used to do for a living. He showed the video. He showed the stock chart. He showed the timeline. He showed the earlier testimony from months before. He lined it all up, and then he asked his audience, on camera, to explain the sequence any other way. Meanwhile, Kimmel was working the same machine from the comedy end. Kimmel played Trump's own voice talking about oil prices dropping, about big money being made, about reconstruction supplies, about loading up trucks and just hanging around in order to make sure everything goes well. Kimmel paused. "I think they call that looting," he said. Deadpan. The audience roared. He played another clip, Trump's own voice, on camera, explaining why the United States had sunk 46 Iranian ships rather than capturing them. Trump had turned to his own military people, he said, and asked why they had sunk the ships instead of capturing them. And they had told him, apparently, because it was more fun to sink them. Kimmel let that clip play to the end. He did not add anything. He did not need to, because the President of the United States had just told the entire country, on camera, that his military had sunk 46 ships because sinking was more fun than capturing. Kimmel also played Trump's conversation with ABC reporter Jonathan Karl. The same Jonathan Karl Trump had called a third-rate reporter only 5 days earlier. The same Trump had now handed a phone interview exclusive to. Kimmel did not need to editorialize. He just let the hypocrisy sit there. 5 days. From third-rate reporter to exclusive interview partner. 5 days. And then came the story that made Ben Meiselas and Jimmy Kimmel suddenly sound like they were reading from the same script. On April 2nd, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General overseeing the Epstein file releases, was fired. On April 7th, Trump announced the ceasefire with Iran. On April 9th, 2 days after the ceasefire, Melania held her unauthorized press conference about Epstein. On April 14th, Bondi's previously scheduled deposition to the House Oversight Committee was quietly canceled because the Assistant Attorney General had filed paperwork arguing that since Bondi no longer held office, the subpoena no longer obligated her to appear. Kimmel pointed out the sequence on air. "So let me get this straight," he said. "They dragged Hillary Clinton, someone who never even met Jeffrey Epstein, in to testify under oath. But Pam Bondi, the woman who publicly said she had the entire Epstein client list sitting on her desk and who then never showed it to anybody, does not make the cut. That," he said, "makes a lot of sense." Ben Meiselas laid out the same timeline in his legal voice, point by point. Bondi fired on April 2nd. Ceasefire announced April 7th. Unauthorized Melania Epstein press conference April 9th. Bondi deposition canceled by legal maneuver. And the former Attorney General, legally off the hook for answering questions under oath about one of the most explosive document releases in modern American political history. Ben named the whole sequence. He named it on camera. He named it in real time. He named the Iran War as the Jeffrey Epstein War on March 1st. He named the ceasefire as a surrender. He named the DoorDash stunt as stock manipulation. He named the Bondi firing as a legal escape hatch. And every single one of his claims, within 6 weeks, had been publicly confirmed by follow-up reporting at major news outlets. Kimmel did the same thing every weeknight from his desk. He watched Trump. He watched the patterns. He played the clips back to back. He built the jokes around the actual footage. He let Trump's own voice do most of the damage. And he trusted his audience to connect the dots. The conclusion both men arrived at, in their very different styles, was the same. The Iran War had been launched on February 28th. Pam Bondi had been fired on April 2nd. The ceasefire had been announced on April 7th. Melania had held her unauthorized Epstein press conference on April 9th. Trump's approval rating had collapsed to somewhere between Bill Cosby and the person clipping their toenails next to you at the gym. And the president himself had told a reporter flatly that he had no idea his own wife was about to go on national television and drag Jeffrey Epstein back to the top of every news crawl in America. Kimmel said it on live broadcast television. Ben said it on YouTube. Millions of people watched both. Trump called it fake. He called Kimmel talentless. He called Meiselas a fake news operation. And meanwhile, Meiselas remained the single most watched YouTube channel in America across every category. And Kimmel stayed on the air every weeknight, 5 nights a week. The Epstein files were still sitting in a secure server somewhere. The Maxwell deposition was still scheduled. And the pattern, as Kimmel might say, had never been more visible. If this breakdown hit you the way it hit those audiences, tap the subscribe button right now. Ring the bell so you do not miss the next one. Drop a comment and tell us which line cut the deepest. Was it the 2 weeks notice? Was it D stands for dementia? Was it Operation Epstein Fury? Was it the DoorDash grandma collapse? Was it she must really hate him? Because these stories are not just entertainment. They are quiet little windows into how power works when it thinks nobody is watching closely enough to notice. The next one is coming soon, and you are not going to want to miss a single second of it.